to the uplift of the group. They sought to go their own path and do everything they can for themselves to the exclusion of the rest of the group.
Yeah. Disorganization, right? Marcus Garvey talks about it, right? That's the biggest.
Absolutely, and that's my favorite quote from Mr. Garvey. The greatest and most powerful weapon used against black folk is disorganization, or I like to put it, the lack of effective organization.
The lack of effective organization. Yeah, I was reading some of your work over the weekend and stuff, man, and I like it, man. I really do, because it speaks a lot to what I think, and I speak a lot out loud about as well. And sometimes people label you as one thing or the other, but you know what? Hey, I don't hate this over here because I love this over here. I'm just speaking on that, and so I don't think that has to be a prerequisite for my conversation. But let me just say I don't do this. No, I'm not explaining anything. I'm unapologetically who I am, because every other thing is, every other person is unapologetically who they are. So I'm not gonna fly up under some shell and be a fraction of who I'm supposed to be or who God told me to be because it makes you uncomfortable. Good, you should be uncomfortable.
Let the church say amen.
You know, that's the way it is. And sometimes that particular mentality rubs people the wrong way, but that's okay though. I'm not here to be everybody's friend. Everybody's not here to be my friend. I'm here to do what I'm supposed to do while I have the chance, as the old folks say in church, while the blood is yet running warm in my vein, if you will.
There you be it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's the way it goes, though, man. So, what would be your opinion? Like, we talk about the youth and the millennials and stuff like that. What would be your opinion as far as that particular age range, or what they call the millennials or whatever? And what do you think can change that particular mindset? You know, or whatever your opinion is. If it's a dark opinion, if you will, what do you think that can happen to try to change that mindset?
Well, let me put it this way,
yes,
Brother Fortenberry. If I felt in my heart of hearts that I knew and understood what it would take to change the direction of our younger generations, and I would include in that both the so-called Generation X as well as the millennials who come along behind them. One of the reasons that Jim and I decided to step aside in favor of younger folks is because we felt that maybe our time had passed, and maybe what we try to say and the examples we try to set for our people are simply no longer viewed as being worthwhile for the younger generations. And therefore, even though we believe fervently in what we believe, done this most of our adult lives. I've been out here on the front lines of the movement since my mid-teens, so that means I got over 60 years of active pro-Black activism behind me at this stage in my life.
So there's no stepping aside. There is no stepping aside. Go ahead.
And Jim has been out here at least over 40 years.
Wow.
And most of us in our generation can say the same thing. You probably hear Claude Anderson talking a lot about how long he's been out.
Yeah, I love Dr. Claude Anderson too, man. I love it.
So yes, we've been there. So I'm not in a position to say what is likely to work with those folks. When I look at the videos that are on the internet these days and watch and hear what these young folks are saying, it frustrates me, quite frankly, no end, and I begin to wonder whether or not there is any hope. And I'm not a person who tends to be shall we say, pessimistic. I'm not a pessimist at all.
Yes.
So I have to shift my gears to look at, okay, well, Amefika, what can you do? You can't make other people do what you think they ought to do. What can you do to increase what you're doing? So I've decided, my youngest son, convinced me that I should collect all of the writings that I've done over the years, for the past 40, 50 years, and compile them into a single volume. And I've done that. And that book will be published sometime soon.
Let me know. And I would definitely promote it on my show and on all my social media pages as well.
Well, I will see to it that you get a copy as soon as we complete these final details of wrapping up the way that it gets marketed and promoted.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
with the expert who put it together for me. But here's one of the frustrations that I've been wrestling with,
Yes, sir.
Brother Fortenberry, and that is I looked at the thing and I said, okay, well, who the hell is going to read this thing? Who cares enough about what this old guy has written over the past 40, 50 years that they would even read it, much less buy it and read it? And that's a huge frustration because it makes you question whether or not you wasted your life when you worked and fought trying to do what you thought was the best thing to do, Black people as a group, as a collective, as opposed to individuals, as a collective. What you devoted your life to it. And the likelihood that any people of those folks are going to care to read and review what you've done and how and why you did it and why they might want to do something comparable themselves is very frustrating to anybody. And I have those conversations with other people like Jim and like others and Claude Anderson, and we all are dealing with that sort of frustrating thing as to whether or not we may have wasted our entire lives working and fighting the good fight to try to help Black people. But here's one point that I think is important given the current situation that we're dealing with your president that we have in office right now.
Yes.
Nature of what that guy is influencing to happen in this country. We need to really understand well what this thing is all about. That's why that paper that I shared with you that I wanted us to discuss this morning is I feel is so important. That is the Civil War continues. Because what we see happening here when Donald Trump says, make America great again, what is he referring to? When was America great if it's no longer great? Because if he's saying, make America great again, that suggests that America is no longer great. Well, when did it stop being great? And when was it great? And what was it about the time that it was great that made it great? What these people are referring to, Brother Fortenberry, is the time when Black folks were slaves and had absolutely no rights whatsoever. I don't think that many people understand that when the North and the South were debating and arguing over whether or not the Southern states were going to secede from the Union, that they did not work up. They understand that those people worked out just about every one of the other details, that the differences that they had, except one. And that one difference between the South and the Union was over the question of slavery. Mm-hmm. In other words, the Confederates, even though they could have gotten everything else in the negotiations that they wanted to get out of the Union, that they asked for and wanted, the one thing that they could not get from the Union, and was the reason why they decided to secede and create the Civil War and start the Civil War, was over the issue of slavery. So these people have continued to wage that, even though they lost the physical war, they continue to fight the fight within the context of the political structure, as I laid out in that paper that I shared with you.
Yes, sir.
So these people have continued to fight the Civil War, and unfortunately, Brother Fortenberry, it would appear as though the Confederates have won, finally have won the Civil War. Because when you look at what there's a guy that's more dangerous even than Donald Trump. His name is Mitch McConnell, the senator from Kentucky. Mm-hmm. This guy has been stacking the federal courts with ultra-conservative Confederate-type judges for the past 20, 30 years. So much so that now they have almost all of the federal courts, not all of them, but virtually, certainly a strong majority of the federal court judgeships in this country are now held by ultra right-wing Confederate so-called conservatives, some who call themselves Republicans, but I call them Confederates because that's what they are. Now, what does that mean to us? That means that if you go to court now, since this is supposedly a system of laws or a nation of laws, as they like to say, and nobody supposedly is above the law, although we are now seeing that the president is way above the law and beyond it for that matter, then what are we faced with here if when you go to court, the very people who are there supposedly to judge you and to see to it that you get judged fairly, those very people are the folks who are going to indict you and commit you to whatever it is, the penalty that they want to put on you, whatever penalty they choose. And that is what I'd like you and I to have some real conversation about this morning on behalf of your listenership.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dig into it then, my brother. We got some time. Let's get it done.
You've had a chance to review the document. So I want to hear from you, because you're speaking also for your listeners. What was your take on that as you read it?
My take on it was kind of like similar to yours. I think that over time there's been I guess what they call whitewashing, if you will. It's kind of like, a little bit, just taking a little bit away at a time, kind of making you more. This kind of, I guess, this type of way of thinking, this kind of thought process has kind of like been dripped into your psyche, like little by little by little, like year after year after year, right? It's almost like volleyball, like it was a setup, but then it was a spike over the net, and until they gave us the symbolism, they gave us a thought, they gave us the ideals, they gave us we've made it, we've changed, we haven't, but they gave us the appearance of that. So then in comes, someone in the office that has that mindset and has ideal, and if you paying any kind of attention to the way this society, this culture, this United States, if you will, has thought for years, it's really no different than what 2019 and what they're thinking, what they thought years ago. But if they keep us distracted with stuff that doesn't matter, right, or things that don't matter, or conversations that don't matter, then we can be easily, I guess, apathetic, as we talked way in the beginning of this interview, right? It goes back around full circle, so you don't really see these things happen, or you don't even care, because guess what? You have no hope that things can change. So then we just continue to let those people around that does not have our best interests at heart. Their only interest is within their own and what they can do for their own community or their own people that's around them.
And when you're the people who are, I call them handling Donald Trump is not the person who did not put himself in office, obviously. He clearly wanted to be in the office, but that was an ego trip. But there were people who are a lot more astute about how the political system works and what can be done under that than Donald Trump will ever be. And they've got this guy in there now that they just got him to appoint as Attorney General, William Barr, who is a real shrewd operator and a very evil person, quite frankly. And this guy is about the business of dismantling what is supposed to be a democratic republic. This is supposed to be a democratic republic system of government. These people are actually working on eliminating that, and in fact, replacing it with a form of a monarchy or an empire. Donald Trump thinks that he would be the person that they would put on the throne. But once they have used him to get what they want, which is to change this government into a monarchy,
yes,
my anticipation is that they will dispose of him rather quickly, in one way, shape, form, or another, because they cannot afford to have someone in a dictatorial position over even them. Who is as crazy as he is. So they would not let him stay there. But he is an effective tool for them to use in order to get to where they want to get, because he will say anything that comes out of his mouth, and he says it in ways that are so shocking to people that they don't know how to react. So he overwhelms people with his bravado, and let's face it, one thing I give him credit for, the guy's not afraid of anybody. He's not a fearful guy, but he is evil as the day is long, and he's greedy. So he is doing what he can do to put himself in a position to be as wealthy as he's always imagined himself as wanting to be. And if in fact he survives, if they don't assassinate him, and I'm not talking about people who are against him, I'm talking about his own people, once they get through using him, if they do not assassinate him, they will